A toast, Marcus said, lifting his glass with the particular ease of a man who had rehearsed the gesture, to Elena, who gave this company 8 years of her life. He paused for the room to settle. 40 people, the restaurant's private dining room, candlelight arranged to flattering effect. Elena sat at the far end of the table in the seat she had been assigned by the assistant who had once reported to her, wearing a dress she had bought, because leaving required a kind of armor, holding a glass of wine she had not touched. 8 years, Marcus said again, warmly, as though the repetition were emphasis and not erasure. And now she moves on to new adventures. We wish her every success. The room drank. Elena raised her glass a half-inch and set it back down. She had been looking, for the last 40 minutes, at the woman seated 2 places to Marcus's left. She was young in the specific way that had become, over the last 11 months, a unit of measurement Elena used without wanting to. Younger than the company's first profitable quarter. Younger than the design patent Elena had spent 14 months shepherding through the approval process. Younger than the scar on Elena's left hand from the night she had stayed until 2 in the morning to fix a production error that would have cost the company its largest contract. Her name was Simone. She had begun at the company 7 months ago in a client-facing role that Marcus had created without consulting Elena, who was at the time his wife and the company's head of product development. She had a quality of attention directed at Marcus that Elena recognized as the attention of someone who did not yet know what he cost. Elena did not hate her. She had tried to, briefly, because it would have been simpler. It hadn't worked. What Elena felt, sitting at the end of the table of her own farewell dinner watching her ex-husband toast her departure with his girlfriend 2 seats to his left, was something colder and more useful than hatred. It was clarity, the specific, load-bearing clarity of a person who has finally stopped explaining something to themselves and can now simply see it. She had founded this company. That sentence had never appeared in any of the materials Marcus presented to investors. The founding story, as it existed in the pitch decks and the press coverage, and the company website, described 2 co-founders with complementary skills who built something together. This was accurate in the way that certain sentences are accurate and still false. Elena had the original concept. Elena had written the initial framework. Elena had taken a second job for 14 months to cover their living expenses, while Marcus pursued the first funding round, because he was the one with the investor relationships and they had agreed, with the logic of 2 people who trusted each other, that this was the most efficient division of effort. She had trusted him. This was the central fact. Not that he had lied to her, or hidden things, or constructed a deception with any particular sophistication. He had simply allowed the story to drift, incrementally, over 8 years, until the story that existed was one in which he was the company, and she was a valued contributor. And she had let it drift because correcting it required a confrontation she had spent 8 years believing was unnecessary. The divorce settlement had confirmed everything the drift had been saying. His lawyer was very good. Her lawyer was competent. The company valuation was real, and the asset division was technically equitable, and Elena had walked away with enough to be comfortable, and none of what she had built, which was the thing that could not be converted into a number, and therefore did not appear in the settlement at all. She smiled at something the woman beside her said. She made the appropriate responses at the appropriate moments. She was very good at the surface of things, which was a skill she had developed in 8 years of attending events as Marcus's wife, and which she had resented, and now, sitting at this particular table, understood she was going to need. The dinner ended at 10:30. She said her goodbyes with the warmth of someone who meant them. Because she did. These were people she had worked alongside, and some of them she genuinely cared for, and none of what was happening was their fault. She hugged the head of engineering, who had been with her since month 3 and who held her slightly too long, and said, quietly, "This isn't right," and she said, "I know," and stepped back. Marcus walked her to the door. The gesture had the quality of something he had decided to do because it was the correct gesture rather than something he felt. "Safe travels," he said. He was going back to the party, back to Simone, back to the company that bore both their names on the founding documents, but only his face in the lobby portrait. "Thank you for the dinner," she said. She meant it as something other than thanks. He received it as thanks. This, too, was clarifying. She took a car to the hotel where she was staying while the apartment she had found was being prepared, and she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall and thought about what she was going to do with the next 2 years of her life, and specifically about the conversation she had been having intermittently for 6 weeks with a woman named Ruth Chong. Ruth Chong ran a private equity vehicle called Meridian Capital, which was small by the standards of its industry and surgically precise in its investments, and which had tried to invest in Alana's company 3 years ago. Marcus had turned them down in favor of a larger fund with a more prominent name, which Alana had thought at the time was the wrong decision, and had said so, and been overruled. The larger fund had brought the capital and also 3 board members who had, over 24 months, reoriented the company's governance in a direction that made Elena's role progressively less central. Ruth had reached out 6 months ago. Not about the company, about Elena. She had read an interview Elena had given about product methodology, and she had a question about a specific framework Elena had described, and the question was so technically precise and so genuinely interested that Elena had answered it at length, and the answer had become a conversation, and the conversation had continued across 6 weeks and 4 calls. Ruth had not mentioned the company in any of these conversations. This was deliberate, and Alana had understood it was deliberate, and had not raised it herself because she was not yet certain what she wanted, and she was not going to commit to a direction before she was certain. She was certain now. She called Ruth at 10:45. Ruth answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake and probably anticipated the call. "How was it?" Ruth asked. "Clarifying," Elena said. A pause. "Tell me what you want." "I want to tell you about a gap in the market that I identified 18 months ago and couldn't act on because I was inside the wrong structure. I want to build the thing I should have built instead of the thing I built. And I want you to tell me whether Meridian is interested in being part of that." Another pause. Shorter. "I've been waiting for this call for 3 months," Ruth said. "How soon can you be in San Francisco?" She was in San Francisco on Thursday. What she had identified, in the 18 months before the divorce had finally consumed the attention she had been directing at her marriage, was a gap in enterprise product infrastructure that her company was positioned to address and had declined to pursue because Marcus and the board had determined the market was too narrow. Alina had run the numbers 4 times across 8 months and arrived at the same conclusion each time, which was that they were wrong about the market size and wrong about the timing, and she had presented this conclusion twice and been thanked for the analysis and overruled. She told Ruth all of this in a 3-hour meeting in Meridian's offices, with documents she had prepared across the previous 72 hours. Documents that were thorough and specific and represented the clearest thinking she had produced in years, because she was no longer operating in a context that required her to make herself intelligible to someone who had already decided. Ruth listened with the complete attention of someone who had made a career of knowing the difference between a person who understood their space and a person who believed they did. She asked 12 questions over 3 hours. They were the right 12 questions. Alina answered all of them without hedging, including the question about why the previous company had failed to pursue the opportunity, which she answered honestly. The structure, the governance, the drift. and without making Marcus the villain of the answer, because the answer didn't require a villain, it required an explanation, and she had one. At the end of the 3 hours, Ruth said, "I want to introduce you to 2 people. One of them will tell you I'm wrong about you. Ignore her, she's wrong about everyone at first. The other will tell you the market gap is real, but the timing is off. He's been saying that about every right idea for 15 years. Listen to his reasoning, and then ignore his conclusion." Elena looked at her. "You've already decided." "I decided after the second call," Ruth said. "I've been waiting for you to decide." The entity they built was not a company yet. It was a framework and a thesis and a term sheet and a founding team of 4, which grew to 9 by the end of the first quarter, and Elena ran it with the particular energy of someone who has spent 8 years accommodating other people's versions of their shared work and has finally run out of accommodation. She was not easy to work for, in the sense that she expected precision and returned it. She was very easy to work for in the sense that she said what she meant and meant what she said, and if she told you something was good, it was good, and if she told you it needed work, she was usually right. The team understood this quickly. The team grew. 8 months in, Meridian brought 2 additional investors. One of them, during the due diligence process, mentioned that they had looked at a similar space 2 years ago through a company called, and he said the name of Marcus's company, Elena's company, the company she had co-founded and left, and had passed because the product team had seemed underutilized relative to the strength of the underlying concept. Elena looked at this sentence in the due diligence report for a moment. Underutilized. The word of someone who had seen the gap between what she was and what she had been allowed to be from the outside, and described it with the neutral language of investment analysis. She forwarded it to Ruth with no comment. Ruth replied with a single punctuation mark. Elena understood it as agreement. The product launched 14 months after San Francisco. It was not the loudest launch in the sector that quarter. It was precise and well documented and addressed exactly the gap Elena had identified, and it worked, which was the only metric she had organized herself around. And the enterprises that adopted it in the first 6 months reported results that made the case studies write themselves. The press came later, as it always did. The profile in the industry publication asked her about her background, and she described it directly, including the 8 years at the previous company, including the co-founding, including what she had built and how she had left. The journalist asked if she was bitter. She said she was grateful, which was true, because clarity was a gift even when its delivery was graceless. And she would not have built what she was building without the specific education of having watched what she had built be used by someone who understood its value less than she did. The journalist asked about Marcus. She said she wished him well, which was also true, in the mild and specific way you wish well to someone who no longer has access to the part of you that he once occupied. She did not know, when the profile ran, that Marcus would read it. She did not know that he would call the number he still had for her, which she had not changed because changing it had seemed like more energy than it was worth, and that he would sit with the phone ringing and she would look at the name on the screen and make a decision in 2 seconds that cost her nothing. She didn't answer. She was in a product review when he called, with 3 members of the engineering team and a whiteboard covered in the specific shorthand of people who had been working together long enough to have their own language, and the phone buzzed in her pocket, and she felt the name through the fabric without looking, and she let it go to voicemail and returned her attention to the whiteboard. He did not leave a voicemail. She did not think about this for more than 30 seconds, which was itself a form of information about how far she had traveled since the end of the table at the farewell dinner, since the car to the hotel, since the edge of the bed and the wall and the decision about San Francisco. The second call came from a blocked number, which meant he had thought about the first call and its implications. And she let this one go too, and this time she did not think about it at all. Ruth came to the office the week the profile ran and brought champagne that was better than the occasion required, and gathered the team in the conference room and said, simply, that she had been doing this for 19 years and she knew the difference between a good investment and a right one. And this was the latter, and she was proud to be in the room. Alana looked around the conference room, 9 people who had chosen to build this thing with her, who had left other things to be here, who had trusted the thesis and the work and the person at the front of both. She thought about the 40 people at the farewell dinner, the assigned seat, the glass raised a half inch and set back down. She thought about Marcus's voice saying 8 years and meaning it as a closing. She had taken it as an opening. "Thank you," she said to the room, and raised her glass, and meant it without performance or armor or the careful management of a surface over a distance. The room drank. Simone, she had heard from someone who still worked at the old company and occasionally sent her messages that she received with the neutrality of someone reading dispatches from a country they used to live in, had left 6 weeks after the farewell dinner. No one had said why. Alina had not asked. The information arrived, and she set it down and moved on. The old company was doing adequately. That was the word that appeared in the quarterly analysis she received, because she was still, technically, a minor shareholder. The settlement had been equitable in ways that neither party had fully calculated at the time. Adequately, a word that meant the absence of failure, rather than the presence of anything. She had built something better. She was still building it. This was the only metric that had ever mattered, and she knew it now with the clean and uncluttered certainty of someone who had removed everything that obscured the view. Some people will stand at the door of what you built and toast your departure from it. They will say your name warmly and let the warmth do the work of all the things they are not saying, and they will believe that the story ends there, at the door with the warm words, because that is where their version of the story ends. The version of the story that is actually true ends somewhere else. It ends in a conference room you chose, with people who chose you back, building the thing you saw clearly enough to build twice. First for someone else, and then, finally, at the right scale and the right speed, and in your own name, for yourself.